Friends, I went to New York City last weekend to try out the new Nikon D850 and sit on a panel of photographers to discuss our experiences with it. Shout out to B&H, by the way, for bringing me out there and for all of them being so great to work with. I used a pre-production D850 for a few hours walking around on the High Line. I used several lenses with it. I tried several of the new features. I got to work with a model for a little bit as well, but I didn't get to keep any of the photos or the D850. During the live panel, they did share a few of my unedited images with the model, and I discussed some of my experience with the camera. That hour-long panel is available on B&H's site and their YouTube channel. I will link to it in the description down below. In this video, I will share with you a more detailed account of my experience with the brand new, not yet released Nikon D850. Also on Facebook, I asked you all for your questions about this body. You all delivered some great questions, so I will answer those while I'm at it. Let's get started with my initial thoughts on the body before I used it. I knew a handful of the specifications and new features. The things that I paid attention to were the resolution. It got a bump to 45.7 megapixels. Continuous shooting frame rate got a bump to 7 frames per second, or even 9 frames per second with the optional grip. Also, the ISO sensitivity is increased on the high end to 25,600. And the D850 has the top Nikon autofocus module. Plus, the buttons on the back and the release mode dial can be eliminated. However, there's no built-in flash anymore because the viewfinder was expanded. And then I also keyed in on some of the additional features like silent shooting and autofocus fine-tune. Now, I knew about other specifications and features, but those are the ones that caught my eye for how I shoot and the things that I initially thought would be interesting to you guys. And really, I was thinking, these all sound good, but these features really aren't inspiring the kind of excitement in me to run out and spend the money on it, being that I already have the D800, D810, and D500. I mean, I'd like to have every new camera that comes out, both for me to play with, but also so that I can share it with all of you. Unfortunately, that isn't in the budget, so I am choosy with what gear I do invest in. And then I used the camera, and now I want it. Okay, so I said I was able to use the camera with several different lenses for a few hours. Let's jump into that. I started off by, feeling the camera up a bit and taking a few minutes to make adjustments to the settings so that it was set up the way that I like it. In doing that, I realized that the D850 has a deeper grip than the D810, which makes it just a bit easier to hang on to, and I like that. I also felt comfortable with making all those settings changes because the camera is set up just like the other Nikon bodies. It's a familiar control scheme, the menus are laid out the same. It made it easier for me to jump into testing out the camera. I wasn't fumbling with controls and menus. When I was doing that, I did find a couple of the new features: focus shift photography and focus peaking display. These were two things that I wanted to check out for the benefit of you guys, but honestly, I wondered if they might be a little gimmicky. This is a sentiment that was mirrored by some of you all on Facebook. After using them, I can say that these options definitely aren't gimmicks. They do work, but depending on how and what you like to shoot, they may or may not be the big reason that would push you to purchase this camera. Let's talk a little bit about each one. In focus shift photography, the camera will control your lens for you and take a series of photos at different focal distances so that you can later take those photos into software and combine them into one super crisp image. And this feature works. It was actually really funny to see the focal distance moving when I looked through the little window on top of the lens. You can control how far the focal point jumps between each photo and how many photos you want at each go-round. Now, like I said, it doesn't combine your images for you. You will need to use software for that. But this feature is pretty cool for someone like me who may not totally have the patience for manual focus stacking in, say, macro photography, but that likes the idea of it. I think I would actually use this feature from time to time, and I definitely think it would be useful for the many of you out there that like macro photography. And then with focus peaking display, in live view, you can have the camera highlight the areas that are highest contrast. so that you can see exactly what in your frame is in focus. Now, the LCD screens on the backs of our cameras these days are so much larger and sharper than they used to be, but I still sometimes struggle to make sure that I have everything in focus that I want to using that little screen. I mean, I can take the time to zoom in and look around the frame, but this is just quicker. Nikon even thought to allow you to change the color of the highlight so that it stands out from your subject, which is really smart. This option, like the focus shift option, aren't the things that would make me want to purchase a camera, but I really like the options and they add to the overall attractiveness of this camera. Okay, so finally after that, I was off and rolling in the city. I talked about this during the live stream, but there really wasn't anything unexpected as to the general usability of the camera. It's easy to use and you are able to take wonderful photos with it. I was outside during the middle of a beautiful sunny day and I was able to take photos in the shade, but there were also some harsh light and shadow transitions. The dynamic range met the challenge. I was pleasantly surprised at the level of detail in both light and shadow areas. I had heard that the dynamic range would be as good or better than the D810, and from what I saw, it's true. As for the other spec bumps, I zoomed in on photos to see what the results of the increased resolution would be. And yes, you've got a lot to work with. One of the gentlemen on the panel particularly liked the resolution because he said that he never knows where his images might end up. If it's getting blown up for a billboard, he's really glad to have the extra megapixels. I think that the file size is something to consider, especially if photography isn't your day job. Make sure you have room to store all of your big D850 files, but they are fantastic files. The camera is quite quick, and I'm not just talking frames per second. I switched it over to continuous shooting, and I used 3D tracking for focus to follow some cars, and it did great. It's quick to focus, and it will continue to shoot in continuous for quite some time. Someone on Facebook asked about the effects on the buffer when shooting RAW plus JPEG. He wanted to know about shooting RAW to the XQD card and JPEG to the SD card. So I know that shooting RAW plus JPEG to the XQD card, you can shoot 7 frames per second until you hit 51 images. Then your buffer will start to slow you down. Let me say that again. 51 RAW and 51 JPEG images in one burst before you start to feel it slowing down. That's a lot. Now I can't say how it would be affected by just using the SD card for your JPEGs and the XQD for your RAW files. That being said, if it did affect your speed or buffer by writing to the SD card for JPEGs, and you are in a situation where speed is that important for you for that long, you may just want to switch over to shooting both files to the XQD card, at least while the action is hot. Let's talk ISO sensitivity. Everyone wants to know about low light performance, but I was out in the daylight, so what's a girl to do? Well, I played with it at the table during lunch. I sat in the diner and I stopped down on aperture and shutter speed, increasing ISO sensitivity and taking photos of my fork and knife, plus a few of Raymond, until I was at ISO 16,000. And at that point, seeing that the images still looked really good, I took out my D810 and replicated the settings. Now this test was obviously not scientific or in a controlled environment, but I confirmed what I had heard, that the D850 will do at least one stopper better than the D810. I mean, I was at ISO 16,000 and the photos were fantastic. Obviously there was a little bit of noise, but definitely nothing objectionable. There's definitely greater quality than we are accustomed to at those kinds of ISO sensitivities. Now going along with higher ISO is how it autofocuses there, and someone on Facebook asked about it, and it is an important question, because if my camera can take photos in the dark but it can't autofocus on anything, I'm not a happy camper. Luckily, the focus module in this camera is the same as in the D500 and the D5, and it definitely works well in lower light situations. I can tell a difference from the D810, and that's really saying something because the D810 already focuses really well in low light. Now, all of that being said, I did have a few upside surprises and things that I enjoyed about the camera. I mentioned the deeper grip earlier. That was nice because I wasn't using an X-strap. I actually even held the camera off of an overpass to take a shot down the street, and I was able to hold onto the camera just fine. I also made use of the tilt screen and live view while I was walking on the street. It is the same tilting function as my D500 here. And it was nice to be able to hold onto the camera like at waist level to take photos and still be able to pay attention to what I was doing on the busy sidewalk. It's also handy for higher low angle shots. Now I do wish that the screen would fold out to the side like some of the other camera manufacturers are doing, but then you'd be left without this row of buttons on the side. The easiest fix would be to like move them onto the touch screen or elsewhere on the body, but I'm not sure I'd like that either, so I don't know. I wonder if they'll do that at some point. Speaking of using live view, I tested out silent shooting. This is a feature I really like. It is actually silent. For my own photography, I have been in situations like weddings or with babies where I want or need to be completely silent, so I love this option. Golf was also mentioned as a place where this would be handy. You might also like it because it minimizes vibration and shutter wear. Now, in using silent shooting, I used the touchscreen. I have been slow to warm up to touch screens on cameras, but I did like just touching where I wanted to focus for silent shooting. And I think I'm getting to the point where I will like the idea of pinch and zoom for previewing images. I mean, that's how I do it on my phone, right? I did receive a few questions on the touch controls from you all on Facebook. First, someone asked about touching to focus. Basically, does it work? And or is it a novelty? In the few photos that I used it for, I did find it to be accurate. I have since used it a little bit on my D500 and I've had good luck with it on this camera as well. As for it being a novelty, I think that would depend on how you like to shoot. For me, it will depend on the situation. I do see myself making use of the touch to focus while in silent shooting. I also think I could make good use of it in combination with the flip out screen when my camera is overhead or down low. My non-use of it of the D500 has been because it's something outside of my normal process, but honestly, after purposefully using it on the D850 to try it out so that I could talk about it during the panel, I don't know why I haven't used it more. It's actually pretty handy. Someone else did ask me about the touchscreen activating when your face presses up against it. And that's a hilarious question because I actually did have this issue. So image review was on the D850 because I was actually looking at almost every image I took because I was testing out the camera. So the few times where I didn't like pull my face away from the camera in between shots, I did actually accidentally scroll through the images a couple of times with my face. For me, I don't typically have image review on, so it wouldn't be an ongoing issue, but I suppose it is something to consider. And then there was another great question about the touch controls. Will you be able to touch to take photos in live view using older manual focus lenses? And I didn't try this with the D850 while I was out, but I did try it here with my D500 and this old 50mm manual focus lens here in the studio, and it works. I know a lot of you like to use older lenses too, so that's nice to know that you can maintain your collection of beloved manual focus lenses, but still make use of some of the high-tech features on the newer camera bodies. One last thing that was a bit of a surprise was the viewfinder. I knew that it was larger, but what does that really mean, you know? Well, what it meant for me was that when I held up the camera to my face for the first time, I felt like I had to look around the scene, kind of like those toys, you know, Viewmasters, where you advance the cartridge and you see some photo in 3D. This isn't something that would change my photography in any way, but it's one more thing that adds to the usability of the camera. It was actually pleasant to look through the viewfinder, which improves my photography experience. It was almost pleasant enough to make up for the missing pop-up flash. Yes, no more built-in flash. Really, it isn't something that I use very often at all, but I like the comfort of having it just in case I need it on the D810. Let's touch on video for a moment. The D850 will shoot full-frame 4K video at up to 30 frames per second, or it will do 1080p at up to 60 frames per second. It also has a slow-mo mode where you can film 1080p at 120 frames per second, but then it plays it back for you at between 24 and 30 frames per second. Now, I did not have time to shoot any video with the D850, but I can tell you about my experience with video on Nikon DSLRs in general. I feel like video on Nikon DSLRs still leaves something to be desired for your average person out there wanting to have one do-it-all camera. I use my DSLRs in the studio to film all of my videos. I use manual focus and I stay in one place while I talk to you. The footage, it looks fantastic. But I don't use my DSLRs for video in the field very often because autofocus is still so-so. If you have a moving subject, my experience is that it still tends to hunt for focus. So there are other things on this camera. More autofocus points, pinpoint autofocus, small, medium, and large RAW options, great weather sealing, a little better than the Nikon D810 because of the lack of the built-in flash. Built-in radio-controlled wireless flash with the new SB5000 speed lights. The new square crop mode, some people are really excited about that. And the new negative digitizer. Now, although I didn't get to use this feature, I did get a question on it from a viewer on Facebook. So this viewer wants to know if the orangey background is removed when you use it. So in case you haven't heard about it, the D850 will act as a film scanner when you use this feature along with an accessory kit. It will reverse the images and store them on your memory card. Now, the question of removing the color cast is one that I don't have a firm answer for. I'm not sure exactly what happens there. However, with any conversion of film to digital, I would expect to do some amount of color correcting. So I don't think it would be a difficult thing to manage in post-processing, especially considering the absolute monster resolution that you are capturing. Now for the ever-present, should I upgrade question. There are viewers out there asking that have an entire range of products, Nikon and not Nikon, that have written to me about upgrading. It happens with every camera release. My first question is always, what is it that you find lacking about your current setup? Where is it falling short? Most often, people say something ambiguous, like low light performance. And yes, if you purchase this camera, you will almost certainly experience better low light performance, so long as you are using lenses that are of the same quality. But think about if your current body's low light performance is enough of a hindrance to your photography to spend the money on this new body. Now, if there is something specific that you need to achieve your goals, by all means, make that purchase if there is another body that will do it for you. I can tell you that the D850 is a fantastic choice for a wide range of photography purposes. But cameras cost a lot, the D850 being no exception. But of course, all that being said, sometimes we just want something new. We just want the newer features. We don't need, but we just want the best in low light performance, or the bells and whistles, or the cool new features. And that's fine too. Again, the D850 is a great choice. Another viewer question was, what is my favorite thing about the D850? And my favorite thing is the continual movement by Nikon towards a camera that is easy to use and gets the job done, whatever that job may be. I'm not worrying if my camera can handle what I'm throwing at it. It just does it. Nikon is giving me lots of options with this body to customize how I use my camera or how I achieve different effects. And the less I can pack in my bag, the happier I am. And it seems like the D850 will do a lot of different things for me. And my last question from a viewer is, do you see the D850 becoming Nikon's flagship camera? Well, I don't think that they're going to get rid of the uber fast single-digit bodies. They serve a purpose. But let me say this. Back in the day, we had the D3, then the D3S, and the D3X, which was the higher resolution, slower model. Now, there's no D5X now. I think if there were, it'd probably look a lot like the D850. And I think that pretty much speaks for itself. Thank you all for sticking around to the end. If you do have another minute, I want to hear from you. What do you think of the D850?